The second part of the challenge was about generalizability of AI. And the biggest thing that we realized is that for AI systems to become robust, most important thing is to train AI on huge amount of data. I think the fact that there's so much variation in chest x-rays, right, starting from how different machines are producing it all the way to how the lighting is and what is the exposure. So there are a bunch of things that can completely vary how the chest x-rays look. And frankly, as mentioned earlier, right, so as someone coming from a non-medicine background, to understand all of those variations firstly was very difficult.
Welcome to the CLL podcast series, where we talk with leading companies and startups disrupting the world with AI and ML. This is the first episode of the Qure.ai podcast series. This week, we take a closer look at Healthtech startup Qure.ai, which went from using AI to make diagnostic imaging easier and more affordable to focusing on coronavirus testing globally. Qure.ai develops deep learning solutions that automatically read and interpret medical images like X-rays, CT scans, and MRIs. The company's product is an AI-based radiology diagnostic aid, and the flagship applications focus on chest X-ray, abnormality detection, and brain CT scan analysis for emergency care. This Mumbai-based healthcare startup recently raised $16 million in funding led by Sequoia India and supported by Mass Mutual Ventures Southeast Asia. For the audience, the same investor also invested in technology-backed companies such as BYJU, Zomato, GoJek, CRED, and many more. Now, as the world battles a pandemic, Qure.ai is ready to do its bit to help curb the further spread of coronavirus. Qure.ai is also the winner of the AI Game Changer Award at the 6th NASSCOM Big Data and Analytics Summit 2018. Today we have with us one of the founding members and Chief of Staff of Qure.ai, Rohit Ghosh. Today's podcast will walk you through how Qure.ai is tapping deep tech. We'll hear from Rohit the why, what, and how behind what a tech startup is building. We also get an overview of how Qure.ai disrupted the healthcare products and dealt with the initial setbacks whilst launching their first flagship product, QXR, along with its first-hand experience from Rohit about recent funding they secured. And to top it all off, we will touch upon the many ups and downs Qure.ai faced on the journey of being recognized as the most accurate algorithm for detecting tuberculosis on chest X-ray. So let's dive deep into the origins of Qure.ai. Let's welcome Rohit, founding member of Qure.ai and Chief of Staff. From a travel enthusiast to a TEDx speaker, he's not only a Google developer expert for ML, but also a semi-radiologist, like he calls to himself. Rohit, it's amazing to see how you've excelled in your career and have transitioned from being an AI scientist involved in building R&D products in the computer vision area to being the Chief of Staff at Qure.ai today. Can you tell me what your day looks like and how do you give yourself breaks between hectic days, especially during this time of working from home?
Absolutely. Thanks, Laisha, for firstly inviting me onto the podcast. Absolutely great to be here. Day on day, I think is a fairly difficult question because, as you mentioned, the journey has been fairly widespread across last 4 years. What a day 4 years back would look like to what it looks right now, probably before COVID, was very different. In fact, to be honest, probably before COVID, I was not even spending as much days in office. Actually, a lot of it was actually in client locations. But yeah, after COVID, I think it's been a fairly lot more relaxing for me. Finally, I could, take some time out, spend some time at home and do it. In terms of taking breaks, I think my best sort of way to relax myself while working from home has been primarily to listen to music and read books. So I couldn't do that while I was doing all this hectic travels and all of that. Today, I do have that opportunity to, if I'm hooked onto a book, I really love reading a bunch of books. So I take time out between those meetings and sit nicely and can read that up. So that's, I think, is my biggest break that I can avail myself as of today.
I think I can totally relate to you as I'm also working from home these days. But yeah, let's now move to talking about how Qure.ai started. We know that Qure.ai was founded in March of 2016 by Prashant Warrior, Dr. Pooja Rao, and an amazing founding team of AI scientists with clinical, scientific, and regulatory knowledge. Qure thought of different uses of AI and deep learning, AI powered toys for kids, a toy that would grow up with a kid, AI based fashion, and then the team wanted to apply AI into healthcare. So, what was the thought process that went into using AI for healthcare and starting with solving one of the grave problems of the world, the inflated demand for radiologists?
Within all of us, there was a strong intensity to make an impactful innovation. I think impact was one of the major things that sort of drove all of us and still drives all of us. And I think in terms of the ideas, the fact that healthcare systems, specifically in countries like India and in other NMICs as well, is hugely broken, and there's really big scope of innovation that could completely change the paradigm of healthcare. At least back in 2016, it definitely seemed like. So from that perspective, we definitely wanted to choose healthcare because, and the idea we actually set out ourselves the target and what is still the motto of the company is to make healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone. So I think that was primarily reason why healthcare was zeroed down upon. Yeah, and I think within healthcare, the idea was more when we started, it was not really as clear as to what exactly would be the journey we would be looking at within healthcare. We started off on a different track. And I think over a period of time, we realized that, again, in terms of impact, the biggest problem that currently most places have was around lack of radiologists. And that's a problem that seemed definitely like the first frontier for AI to conquer. So that's how we went about that whole business of looking at AI primarily for radiology.
Okay, and then you slowly transitioned into solving the TB problem as well in India and across the world.
Yeah, I think TB was fairly down the line. I think it was probably somewhere around May, April around there, 2016. We sort of decided to go ahead and look at radiology. And within radiology, again, there are a bunch of modalities, body parts that we were looking at early on. And somewhere around, I think, October of 2016, we started looking at what we can do with chest x-rays, given that the chest x-rays are normally the most highly reported voluminous scans and there's not a lot of radiologists who want to read x-rays. So plain films are the most neglected domain across entire radiology. So that's where we started looking at. And I think once we started looking at chest x-rays, the question then came along was, what within chest x-rays do we want to look at and focus at? So from that perspective, TV definitely seemed like something it actually hit home, right? Because in India, India is called the TV capital of the world. And of the few things that we are probably not really proud of in topping that entire list. So there definitely chest x-rays is a critical part of the diagnosis process. And we figured that the AI systems, current existing systems at that point of time were not adequate and capable enough to take care of quick instantaneous reads. And there was a huge value that we could see right away. So that's, I think, somewhere around end of 2016, start of 2017, we started looking at what we can do for TB.
So for the audience, I would say India with 2.8 million cases annually is being counted as the TB capital of India, as you mentioned. And also Qure.ai is solving one of the major health problems of TB in India. But as an AI scientist and as a founding member, you'd agree that it's difficult taking a product from a research phase to a market. So the early life of the product started with a glitch. The first time your team deployed QXR at a radiology center in India around 2.5 years ago, they saw a drop in accuracy from what they had observed in training and test datasets to what the doctors say. No doubt training deep learning models, especially in healthcare, is only one part of building a successful AI product, and bringing it to healthcare practitioners is a formidable and an interesting challenge in itself. So how did the team handle the problem of generalizing the AI algorithms in place and achieving more than 90% accuracy in detecting 15 of the most common chest X-ray abnormalities today?
Yeah, I think that was actually the incident that you mentioned. So it's still vividly, I remember that. So back in 2017, and we saw this huge drop in accuracies when we deployed real time. So There were a lot of learnings from that particular incident. One of the most important ones, if I would call it, was the fact that uh, interpretability is something that we need to do not just for the sake of better user experience for radiologists, but also something that can genuinely help us understand what AI is doing. So that was, I think, one of the most critical things that we understood during that particular incident. So that was, I think, that was one of the major learnings. Second learning was obviously in terms of testing and how you evaluate AI algorithms, and how to make it more generalizable. And generalizability as a concept was something we started dabbling with back then. And I think both those pieces about AI, right, interpretability of AI as well as generalizability of AI, was something that we closely saw, from firsthand how it can completely affect deployments and the performances there. So from that point onwards, we started working, I think, in both those aspects. Interpretability, obviously, we went ahead and we have published also some of the research work that we did in building interpretable systems for AI, specifically for medical imaging, because again, a lot of interpretability work at that point of time was primarily around what was done on natural images. There was not really anything that was out there done for medical images. So it was a huge task to take that piece of learning from natural images, convert it for medical images, and put that out. So that was one part of the problem of using interpretability, how we went about it. The second part of the challenge was about generalizability of AI. And the biggest thing that we realized is that for AI systems to become robust, most important thing is to train AI on huge amount of data. I think the fact that there's so much variation in chest x-rays, right, starting from how different machines are producing it all the way to how the lighting is and what is the exposure. So there are a bunch of things that can completely vary how the chest x-rays look. And frankly, as mentioned earlier, right, so as someone coming from a non-medicine background, to understand all of those variation firstly was very difficult. And once you understand some of those things, then I think it was more of how to make AI systems robust to all of that. And I think huge amount of data and also a lot of other research techniques that we again incorporated from natural image and other domains, not only images, other domains of machine learning as well, that we incorporated as part of our processes. That I think made the whole system a lot more robust. And yeah, I think, but that's a very important thing you mentioned, because I think today when we talk to a lot of people and people are building out the AI system, this is an important message that I always want to relay, that the building part is a very interesting and obviously adventurous part of the journey, but also apart from that, to make it real is a fairly longer shot. And to do that, it also requires, if not more than that, lot more dedication and effort to make it real.
Totally agree with you, Rohit, on that. So I've also seen that Qure.ai has been very active in publishing white papers and putting out their research and data sets in the world. And I would like to know your opinion on the gap that's there between the academic research papers and building a commercially viable software.
Absolutely. I think, firstly, I would recommend, so when you say white papers, so these are mostly all the work that we have been putting out in terms of peer-reviewed publications. And within them, I think there's obviously, while we have obviously strived to make as much of publications out in the open and be as transparent about that entire process, I think the bigger challenge that is there is putting that into a commercial use case. And the major reason why I see that as a challenge is firstly, in terms of, say, for example, data sets, right, or things that you output out for peer review. There's nothing really that, while as a myself also a reviewer for a bunch of journals, and the thing with that process of peer reviewing some of this work is that you are primarily trying to see if the AI training and some of the way it has been and the inferencing has worked, is that sort of correct? Is that working as per expectations? But what you're not checking, for example, is that what is the amount of data that has been trained, if the data is enough to come to the conclusion, did the data include all sorts of different varieties that it could probably the AI systems could see in real. So it doesn't include all of that. And it's very easy for researchers to, for example, quote some performance, say on 100 or 200 images and go out with that. And while that is extremely obvious, if there's a huge challenge, let's say something which is, say, detecting early cancer from some kind of medical images. That's definitely doing it even on 100, 200 images is a fairly commendable effort. But in reality, to put something out like that would be a dangerous proposition because you do not really know how they really work in real life and all of that. So I think today there's not much of a publication which actually is on a huge amount of data sets, or for most importantly, I don't think there are a lot of publications out there which actually talk about how AI systems are actually benefiting patient health. Right? So obviously a lot of it is around accuracies or efficiencies, all of that. So obviously some of those things are definitely lacking when you look from a commercial perspective.
So, Rohit, talking about data, Qure.ai started with a lesser subset of around 50,000 X-rays and then finally went on to curating a database of about 2.5 million X-rays. So, creating a data set of such high volume is not easy. So, what were the initial challenges in terms of data collections and what were your sources of data, if you could share with us? And how did the team handle all of this in the beginning?
Absolutely. It's an interesting story actually. When we started off, we were probably not even at 50,000. When we actually started off, it was completely just scraping images from websites, manually looking at them and doing that on a very, as you would call, hacky basis. And while that was good to get started off, we definitely realized even way before our first deployment and even way before thinking about generalizability, we realized that we definitely need a huge amount of data to make some of the systems really robust. And that's the point of time I think we started looking at what we can do to make the systems more robust, get more data into the system. And we tried working out with different partners, I would say, who primarily healthcare providers or some kind of radiology outsourcing platforms, and different partners and universities as well. And tried to work with them to understand what sort of problems they want to solve around chest x-rays. And not only chest x-rays, I think other parts of images as well, but primarily focused on x-rays, chest x-rays, and we tried to see what we can do for them. And that's how we got started with that process of working with different partners and engaging with them to provide a solution at the a solution in exchange of the data that they were providing. And we obviously had to go through a arduous process of ensuring whether the patient consents and everything were recorded for all of that. So that was a long journey, and it was definitely not only long, it was definitely worthwhile as well. I mean, it was tough, but it was definitely worthwhile to work with all our partners and engage with them. A lot of them obviously had reservations around sharing data, so that also was perfectly fine for us at that point of time. But yeah, I think overall, some of the partners definitely agreed to work with us, and that's how we have the huge amount of data that we have today. So I think that obviously is one of the over a period of time that happened, and once that was all of the data was inside the system, I think it made the AI 100 to 1,000 times better than what it was back in October of 2016.
Okay, so definitely data plays a really big role in making algorithms robust and actually putting it out in the market. And that's why Qure.ai have come a long way. And after the successful launch of chest X-ray interpretation tool in 2017, we've bagged many awards globally, top 30 promising technology startups in India, the Net Explore Award for Innovative Healthcare AI from over 2,000 globally technology initiatives, NVIDIA's Social Innovation Award, and winning the Digital Pathology Challenge at MICC-AI. So how do you think recognition on these global platforms helped Qure.ai create a far-reaching impact for healthcare and technology in health?
Absolutely, like now actually when you went through that list, I was also like, okay, that's a lot of recognitions that we have won. But yes, we have, thanks to what we have been able to build over the first 2-3 years, we could actually get a good amount of recognition quite easily, and obviously add to that the publications. So I think that for the first time there was some Indian company that actually went out and try to win on this kind of challenges, or this kind of getting this kind of global recognition. So that definitely mattered to us, and it definitely helped in the perspective of how Qure is, I think, looked at. It's not necessarily looked at as an Indian AI company trying to just do innovations within the scope of this country, but it's primarily, I think, the global claim of what we can do and kind of quality that we can provide sitting right out of India. that testament and that validation was definitely something that came as part of this kind of recognitions on international platform and the international media coverages that we got along with those. So I think our aspirations were definitely there from day one to look at what we can do with Qure and make it to a global organization. But yeah, just having that aspiration was not enough. To be able to go out and get some of these global recognitions, definitely established Qure from there onwards as something that's going to look at the entire global healthcare system and think about problems that we can solve sitting from India. So that definitely helps. I think that kind of a global recognition definitely helps create that uh, concept of a company which is not substandard or something just because they're based out of India.
That's amazing, Rohit. And it's always inspiring to hear the backstory of how you became what you are today. Moving forward, the next Eureka moment for the team was when you deployed the QER HCT solution to detect trauma and stroke cases at a hospital in India around April 2018. And HCT scan solution was also showcased at GTC 2017 and SIIM 2017. Amazingly, in March 29, Qure.ai's traumatic brain injury and stroke triage tool also received CE certification. So I'm intrigued to understand what kind of medical research went into creating an easily accessible diagnostic tool and how long did it actually take it to bring out to people?
I think HCT was something we started working probably around 3-4 months later on when we started working on chest X-rays. Our first sort of submission of international. So there's this conference called RSNA, which is radiology's probably largest conference across the world. So RSNA 2017 was the first time we had sent something over for HCT and that got approved there. So that kind of gave us a confidence that there's definitely good problem to solve, and probably there's a lot of things that we can do around with it. But I think in terms of solving that problem, it was genuinely a lot more difficult than chest X-rays, just primarily because of the fact that the images are 3D as opposed to X-rays, which are 2D. And not only that, I think that the kind of complexities that come in with 3D images like dimensionality and some of those problems are also fairly critical for us to solve before we could again get something that was robust out there. For example, I remember this story, and this I probably have told also a lot of people. I think when we were working on HCTs, one of our biggest challenge was how we detect fractures from CT scans. And this was very difficult for us because, fractures are basically this thin line, right? And it's very difficult to confuse that from other things that are very similar looking on a head CT scan. And it's almost similar to looking for a needle in a haystack. And how we went about solving that problem is very interesting. We actually talked to a lot of radiologists after almost 1 month, 2 months of hard trying and solve that problem. We couldn't get a way around. So we started talking to radiologists to understand how they go about it, because it seemed like something that human beings would also have a very difficult time doing. And when we talked to radiologists, we understood how they do it. And they do actually use some other techniques, which is basically just trying to see where the trauma is. And from there, they try and detect fractures. And that kind of paved also opened up a new way of thinking for us. The fact that the way radiologists actually go about solving some of their challenges, how diagnosing some of the things, is very interesting and very, it's definitely worth learning from that perspective. So while we had obviously started doing some of that already during 2016 when we had started, but how to actually go in a much deeper level and use some of that for solving this kind of problem was very interesting. And that completely changed, I think, the way we were looking at problems to solve. And it's so the idea is that AI is obviously something that is helpful. If you give it a lot of data, it would definitely give it a diagnosis. But what you can do to make that AI system understand better, like how when you teach children, you give a hint. And you can also give those kind of hints to AI systems to make them learn better and more robustly. So that's some of those things we picked up, how radiologists do that decision, mimic all of that decision making into AI systems. So I think, that HCT process, doing that was definitely a much tougher AI challenge, if I would call it. But once we did it, I think then obviously the kind of approvals and the validations we got, including our publication in Lancet, This was in October of 2018. The head city algorithm and the results that we had got with it got published in the Lancet, is almost, I think, the most prestigious medical journal. And the interesting part was there was no AI medical imaging publication in the Lancet before that. And this was Lancet's first ever AI medical imaging publication in October. So yeah, that was a huge validation of the fact that what we were doing, we were on the right path. And then the CE approvals and everything started coming in, which obviously, and then a bunch of different users, as you mentioned, the first one was in Kerala. And there onwards, the journey has been onwards and upwards.
Amazing. Talking about the CE approvals and FT approvals, let's fast forward to May 2018 when the QXR became the first AI-based chest X-ray interpretation tool to receive the CE certification. Tell us more about how Qure.ai expanded to other countries and dealt with all of these data compliance laws, the CE and FT approvals.
So in terms of expansion, I think there are two parts to that, right? One is whether there's an actual use case to solve.
Right.
And the second part is primarily around whether we have the regulatory approval to actually do that. So when we started, as I mentioned, right, some of the global recognition that we had got obviously set up the stage for us to look at something broader than what we were doing. And to do that, obviously, we had to prove ourselves worthy of quality on an international platform. So CE definitely is one of the most stringent regulatory authorities responsible for entire Europe, and across the world, it's a fairly recognized global regulatory authority. So that definitely made sense for us to approach CE for certification and getting the product approval. And obviously, with the quality of research that we had done and the performances that we had achieved, it was fairly easy for us to get there. And once we did that, then the idea was to primarily see which places have the need for something like this. Just because we have an AI solution which can look at chest X-ray and give an automated diagnosis does not necessarily mean that the world is, in everywhere there's a lack of radiologists that needs to be solved. So from that perspective, we realized that a lot of things that we were doing around TB obviously extrapolates to a lot of places within Southeast Asia and other parts of the world as well, where they're struggling with tuberculosis as a problem. And at that point of time, it was surprising to me also to know that almost 100 odd countries across the world actually have that as a very significant problem, and part of their next 5 or 10-year goals actually include complete TB eradication. So that was definitely there. Apart from that, with the chest X-ray, we found there was a huge use case around high volume centers, right? High volume radiology places where they do a lot of X-ray scans and they don't have enough number of radiologists to look at that. So that's when we devised our algorithm, which can completely separate the normal chest X-rays, which reduces a huge workload. And that had its own use case in other parts of the world as well, specifically parts of the world which are in developed countries where TB not necessarily is a big problem, but the bigger challenge is primarily they don't have as much of radiologists. Parts of Europe, also in remote parts of these developed countries, right, where you don't have enough number of radiologists reporting. So I think were the primarily ways in which we looked at expanding back in 2018. Obviously, over the period last 2 years, there are more use cases that the X-ray software can do, and that has enabled access to even different other geographies or segments. But primarily back then, it was, I think, those two use cases that sort of led the way.
I should say that it has been quite a journey of many firsts and a lot of ups and downs. And it's commendable how Qure.ai is working towards solving the problems at a large scale where there's one radiologist per 1 lakh people, especially in India. So what is the driving factor in providing a solutions at such affordable rates? Like I read that it's around $1.5 for radiology interpretation.
So for us, I think if you're asking for the drive, the idea was obviously embedded within Qure back in 2016 when we had started, which is to make healthcare more accessible and affordable. So if we had to look at ways in which we could completely change or impact at least the major healthcare delivery systems, obviously one of the aspect is how you can make it more cost efficient. And the other aspect is around obviously quality. And I think both of them are fairly important when talking about healthcare delivery systems. You obviously want to make them affordable as well as at a good quality. It's not necessarily with compromising the quality. So I think keeping those two things in mind, we always wanted to look at ways we can bring down the costs of healthcare delivery and specifically in countries like India, where it's fairly distributed, there's a lot of requirement for it, but there's not a very clear path to, getting paid for some of those things. So from that perspective, I think we did a fairly good job of building a solution that can do that at a fairly, at least definitely much cost effective than the existing modes of solution. So that's something, for example, in tuberculosis, if I talk specifically. Tuberculosis, the biggest challenge is primarily before Cure, any of AI solutions were existing. The easiest way to test people was something called a microbiological test, and which would cost you a fairly huge bomb. And that's one of the reasons why you cannot, as a TV program or someone running TV program, you cannot scale that to a lot of people. The biggest challenge is you have to do it probably for a very few limited people in a small geography. And with AI and X-rays, what we could do was primarily built in a screening system, which could look at patients. It could identify whether they actually are likely to be TB, and then only those patients who are suspected of TB are the ones who get tested using the microbiological test. And this process, if you are earlier using 100 odd or 200 odd expert machines, let's say, to test 100 machines to test 100 people. So suddenly using 100 machines, you would be able to test out 500 to 1,000 people, and leveraging the existing infrastructure on X-rays. So I think those are the ways which we have been able to drive innovation. It's just not about the software itself. I think it's primarily more about the fact that we will leverage existing infrastructure like extra X-rays, right? X-rays are almost there across all hospital sites, different kind of vans, all of those. So just by using some of those kind of things, we have been able to also lower down the whole cost of healthcare delivery in some of these geographies.
Awesome. So, talking about scaling up and taking things forward, earlier this year, Qure.ai secured funding of $16 million. Big congratulations to the whole team. And recently, they have also been recognized as the most accurate algorithm for detecting tuberculosis on chest x-rays by the Stop TB partnership. How do you feel about this, and how have such milestones shaped the QXR as a product and helped Qure.ai create a name for it globally?
I think you mentioned two things. So the first one is funding. So thanks for the wishes, and yeah, that's obviously a milestone in the journey, and it's a validation of the kind of work that we have been doing. But yeah, talking about the publications, I think that's a phenomenal publication, because as I was mentioning earlier, and you had asked this question about what is the gap between what are being done academically and what is being done commercially.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge, as I was mentioning then also, is that there's not a single data set, for example, to compare, say, different AI solutions. Your AI solutions are not competing on Kaggle, right? So there's no way to know if one AI solution says 99% accuracy versus someone says, say 91 or 92. There's not really a way to understand which one is actually more accurate, because everyone's doing on their own data. And there's nothing really to understand how to go about that process. As a clinician who's trying to understand which AI system to look at. And this was a second time, actually. It's a Stop TB partnership back in October of 2019. They had done a similar study, which included 3 AI companies, and they had looked at 2,000 patients from Nepal and Cameroon. And they did a similar kind of a study where they compared AI solution. And what they found was that 2,000 is probably a very small number to actually ascertain which one is good. So what they did was, in this second round of studies, if I would call it, is to look at 23,000 patients, and not only just 3 AI companies, they looked at 5 AI companies, and they did this over a fairly good month or two. I think almost two and a half months of effort they put in, and huge kudos to that entire team to do this kind of an independent evaluation exercise for the betterment of the entire community. So once the results were out, I think it was very strong validation of the quality of research that we have been doing so far. The fact that on a 23,000 data set among 5 AI companies, Qure was the best performing AI solution, and by a margin. That definitely boosted the entire, not only the morale of the team in terms of what we had been believing in and been very focused. I think as challenge with Qure and the way we have been looking at it is that we have been very focused on, say, few things. We have not really dived into a bunch of AI. So, for example, there are companies which would do AI for chest CT, abdomen CT, or 15 different things, let's say. But for us, we have been very focused on chest X-rays and head CT. And just because we have been very focused and just doing those two things exceedingly well, so that strategy, we were actually right in going ahead with that strategy, was something we got a validation, I think, when this kind of results come in. And obviously, I think in overall sense, I think the very fact that all these 5 AI companies perform better than human readers also was a very strong point, I think, that actually helped people understand that, okay, there's a possibility that AI could actually perform better than human readers in certain kind of tasks. And it probably might make sense to use AI, at least for a screening kind of a thing. So that knowledge, I think, was most important to be brought out to the rest of the world. And I'm genuinely big congratulations and kudos to the Stop TV team for bringing that whole message out about AI and what different options you have within AI and how it performs in a similar kind of.
Yeah, so I would agree that getting approval and getting recognition in health tech, it's a long journey. And now I would like to, shift our focus to the current pandemic that we all are dealing with, the COVID-19 pandemic. So Qure has released a COVID-19 progression monitoring tool and pandemic response platform. And basically what it does is to sort patients into those that need immediate attention and to those that can live under home quarantine. It's being used to monitor disease progression in 6 countries, including Italy's San Raffaele University Hospital in Milan. So I want to understand what went into tailoring the QXR product to cope up with this current problem of COVID-19 so fast.
Primarily, all the great work was done by the R&D team to make this ready. I still remember the meeting back in March of 2020, just a few days before the lockdown thing happened in India. And we were really discussing about what we can do for COVID. And the most obvious answer was obviously what we can do with the QXR product, because that already had the CE capable. Different findings, radiological findings of COVID were already something we were CE approved for. So it was more about understanding how those manifestations look actually in COVID, what are the kind of characteristics of them. For example, if it's an opacity, it's unilateral or bilateral, different kind of medical characteristics of those kind of things. So it was more about understanding that piece. So there was, thankfully, again, big thanks to the entire research radiology community out there who put out a lot of research efforts till then based on the patients in China. What are the kind of findings that they were seeing from these patients? So that made our job a lot more easier, because we could finally understand very easily, going through some of this literature, is that this is the kind of findings that we already have the capability to detect, and this is how the findings normally look on the X-ray. So keeping that in mind, I think we jumped right away to action to see what we can do with that kind of a data. And then again, work with some of the partners to help us get some access to COVID-specific data, which made the testing and the training of the algorithm a lot more stronger. And I think just around the same point of time, because of the fact that we were doing already something similar with chest X-rays, we already had a lot of interest that were coming in. And San Rafael was, for example, I think the first site we went live with back in, around somewhere in early April. I don't remember exactly. But and then onwards, it's been, we obviously, with that particular deployment, we also learned a lot of different things about how clinicians are using it, how physicians are going to actually take decision based on that. And once that story became clearer, then we could expand into other geographies and other locations across the world, trying to help them. The challenge is obviously AI is, before that point, AI was really something which was people were looking more with an eye of a suspicion. What happened with COVID and the pandemic was the healthcare systems across the globe got severely burdened with the kind of workload that was coming in. And there were a lot of centers I know where I had talked to some of these radiologists, and they were spending almost their weekends, their entire days from morning 7 to almost midnight in the hospital wards trying to help people. Some of them even did not have their protective kits along with them. So it was a real big challenge. I still remember talking to physicians across the globe. It was actually a massacre of sorts. And at that point of time, AI could definitely suddenly could act as someone who's almost part of the team, right? Except that it's not a human being, but it's a machine which is able to work for them and help them reduce their workload. So this pandemic also changed that perspective of what AI can do, and with people looking at it from a suspicion to looking at more of a support tool. So that shift in perspective also, I think, broadly happened during this entire pandemic. And after, I think, we went with live with Italy, then obviously there were a lot of other places, including India and in UK, NHS Bolton as well. We went live. So this, I think, created the foundation stone, the stories that started coming out of some of these locations about how physicians using it paved the way for more physicians across the globe using it.
Great. So, talking about challenges, Qure.ai also tied hands with the Municipal Corporation of Greater Mumbai to start using chest X-rays to detect coronavirus cases. What were some of the challenges that you faced with the density of population like that of Mumbai?
Yeah, so ironically, the entire team, at least before COVID, is based out of Mumbai, and I'm still based in Mumbai. And the fact that while Bombay, soon it became very clear within the first 1 month or so that Bombay is going to be a hotbed for some time, and the fact that we could step up to that particular need in the city that you are situated in was a big matter of big pride for all of us. And when we started with Bombay Municipal Corporation, I think the first aim was primarily to look at some hospice sites across the city where we can deploy this, where this can help in doing that screening for people. And the major challenge in Bombay was that I think a lot of people were asymptomatic carriers. They were not really, I think it was also acknowledged by the municipal corporation that there's almost 70-75% of the people asymptomatic, which meant that there are a lot of people who were completely showing no signs till like a certain point of time, and then suddenly within a matter of 3-4 days, they would suddenly become critical, and then they would be need to be admitted. And there's obviously a huge challenge around the hospital beds and all. So using the X-ray solution, what we could primarily do was specifically pick up this kind of people who were showing no symptoms but had already some kind of chest infection, pick up those patients and screen them, triage them for RT-PCR. So that was obviously the biggest use case that sort of came out of Bombay. And once we did this deployment in some of the hospital site, it became really something that made a lot of sense for everyone. And then what obviously was asked from us, the next step was that can we deploy some of these things in mobile vans? The reason being a lot of population in Mumbai is primarily densely located. And for this kind of people, asking them to come all the way to hospital sites to get tested was something that sounded a bit probably challenging in terms of obviously the entire transport and everything locked down in the city. So what we did was we put this kind of X-ray systems, the AI and X-ray systems in vans, and the vans would go out and test people specifically in the containment zones or the zones with the highest COVID activity. And then people who are likely to have COVID or who are showing any kind of chest inflammation, those patients were sent in for RT-PCR test right then and there. So this, I think, the way we did it in Bombay is fairly different from where we did in other parts of the world. And that's primarily because of the kind of city Bombay is and challenges that are there in sort of doing this in hospital centers and all. But this definitely proved to be a very fruitful measure of how BMC tackled COVID. I think it's been phenomenal. I think the way they have tested out people, how the number of people they've tested, and also how they've manage those patients who have been tested, right? Sending them to isolation homes, separate isolation homes. That has been phenomenal.
I think it's amazing how Qure.ai is contributing to flattening the curve, not just in India, but globally, and kudos to your team for that. Coming to how Qure.ai has been a part of many firsts in getting CE approvals for QXR and QQuant. Firstly, congratulations on receiving the 4-in-1 FDA clearance for QER head CT scan AI solution. For the audience, can you tell how getting this approval is a big thing in the health tech field?
Absolutely. Firstly, thanks for that. Yes, it's been a fairly first for an Indian AI company, and we are proud to be leading that way. FDA is obviously the most stringent in terms of regulatory authorities across the globe. And FDA's stamp of approval definitely makes although it's meant primarily for usage and approval within the US, but because of the way they screen the process and the way they go about that, I think it makes it a completely acceptable standard across the entire globe and fairly respected standard, if I would call it. So to get an FDA approval for any kind of drugs or any kind of medical device is a fairly big deal that way, just because of the global approval that you get because of the same product. And the fact that FDA goes about that process very strictly and stringently also means that anyone who's going through that process and getting an approval definitely has done their due course of diligence, and their work has been fairly reviewed by everyone involved. So from that perspective, FDA definitely makes a lot of, if I would call it, in terms of the approval and the acceptability of the AI. But outside that, I think the other big, not a big thing, but I think the other thing is that since anyone across the globe can do that, anyone can apply for an FDA approval, being an Indian company and to be able to go there and do this completely remotely, actually, that was also fairly a challenge, I would say, to do some of these interactions and completely from sitting out of India. So that definitely also was something that we were not expecting, but then that the fact that we did it and we could do it successfully definitely helped us a lot.
Right, amazing. So, for our audience, again, Qure.ai is present in 28 countries today and has impacted more than 600,000 lives. And its technology is being used in over 20 countries for the screening of tuberculosis. Well, that's not all. Recently, Nordic MedTech has joined forces with Qure.ai to provide radiology practices with superior artificial intelligence in the Nordics and Baltic regions like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. So, with all of this going on, what's next for Qure.ai?
I think a big part of our focus would be still, in terms of product, let's probably speak of that first. I think product-wise, as I mentioned, we have been extremely focused in terms of what we have been building for chest X-ray and head CT. And that's the reason we could build kind of solutions that we have been able to build. And I think from a product perspective, obviously, we want to keep looking at this particular modalities and what we can do to make the solution that, take to the next notch, do more findings that we can detect some of these things. Apart from that, obviously, as I mentioned earlier also, that we definitely don't want to limit ourselves to a particular geography or a particular kind of a market. So from that perspective, obviously, as you mentioned, Nordic MedTech is there. And there are a lot of our partners across the globe with whom we have been working to sort of expand our access to other markets. The goal, obviously, long-term goal is, as I mentioned, and it's fairly ingrained probably as part of our mission, is to make healthcare more accessible and affordable. And keeping that in mind, we would definitely want to look at problems for which, for example, healthcare are not problems, but I would say, let's say patients or people who are delivering the healthcare services. What are the problems they are facing in terms of when it's not accessible or affordable, and how we can use AI to make some of that possible. I think from that perspective, we are definitely looking to do probably different products that we can look into and expanding what we are already having, and as well as expand into other geographies, get the regulatory approvals for all of those geographies. That's definitely part of our 1-year plan.
That sounds amazing, and it has been quite an involved and interesting discussion so far. So, Rohit, we wanted to have a little fun with you in a segment that we call Rapid Fire. So, let's start with the first question. Work from home versus in office?
Oh, absolutely work from home. Reading books and, what better than you don't want to waste 2 hours traveling. So definitely work from home.
Awesome. Are you a morning person or a night person?
COVID, I was night person, but with COVID and work from home, I'm a morning person now.
Okay. Success versus fame?
Depends what you actually call success. Fame, definitely not. Success is important, but it depends again, I think, from person to person.
Okay. So next one, COVID-19, boon or a bane?
A boon for definitely both perspectives. I mean, from a professional perspective, definitely what Qure has been able to do. And personal perspective is also the work from home thing has really worked out well for me. So absolutely a boon.
Right. Engineering versus medical?
Oh, this is tough. Engineering still. Medical, I go back to my 10th and I had to do this all over again. I would still not do it. I love it. I really love reading about it. It's interesting aspects, but I guess, I'm better off doing the computer science piece of it.
So you're happy being a semi-radiologist, right?
Yeah, I guess that's what I have to settle for in this life.
Awesome. Mathematics versus statistics.
Maths, any day. And statistics is fairly an expanded version of maths, and I don't really look at it very differently from there. But inherently, since childhood, I have trying to read a lot more on maths side. It's a lot more fancier for me.
Okay. So hey Rohit, we are almost at the end of the podcast and we wanted to know you a little personally. So why the name Qure.ai?
Oh no, this is funny. Actually, I get asked this a lot. Cure, actually, the reason we went with that is we wanted to have Cure with a Q, with a C, right? An original Cure, and we didn't get a domain for it. That's basically about it. And we settled for Cure with a Q. It just sounded, sweet, subtle, and also catches your attention. So that was about it.
Okay. So you've been to many countries across the globe. What is that one place you want to travel once this pandemic is over?
I mean, genuinely, I don't want to travel anywhere. I used to hate all that travel schedule that I had. But if I had to actually look back and only one place that I really enjoy, I think that was in Azerbaijan, which is in Baku, Azerbaijan. So that's something I really love. Definitely, given a chance, I would want to go back there.
Okay. So living in Mumbai, what's your take on Mumbaiker's lifestyle?
I love it. I hail from Kolkata, which is fairly laid back and which is not as active, if I would call it. And it has got a warmth of its own, but Mumbai for me is a city of dreams, right? I moved here almost 10 years back, exactly almost 10 years back. And it's been a fancy journey from not only the college, but also after college. So for me, it's a city of dreams. It's a place of constantly working towards your dreams and achieving them. And this city definitely rewards your working hard. So for me, that's primarily what Mumbai is.
So with this, we come to the end of episode 1 of the Qure.ai podcast with Rohit. Thank you for sharing your journey, bringing affordable, accurate, and faster medical diagnosis worldwide. The pandemic may have put the brakes on some plans, but the team is nevertheless looking to expand Qure.ai product portfolio globally. Thank you.
Thanks for calling me for the podcast. It was a pleasure to be here and was definitely fun. Make sure to subscribe to the Co-Learning Lounge YouTube channel and join their community. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes in the series. We are going to talk a lot about what other aspects of Qure are, and they're definitely doing fantastic work building tech communities across the globe. So please definitely support them.